The house on Quigley Road in Stony Creek. The red brick one with the covered front porch. And the rose bush. Nobody planted that blooms every June anyway. I bought it without telling anyone. Not even the person I bought it for. I spent 4 months being very quiet about it. Running numbers late at night, and making calls I kept off speaker. And the whole time I was thinking about a text message I received 5 years ago while sitting in a hospital parking lot at 7 in the morning with a cold coffee and nowhere to go. But I'm getting ahead of myself. This story doesn't start with the house. It starts with October, with a phone call, and with my mother's voice saying something I've never fully been able to unhear. I was 27 that fall, renting a 1-bedroom in the Beasley neighborhood of Hamilton. It was a decent apartment on a decent block. Not fancy, but mine in the way that matters, the way where you stops noticing what's missing and start noticing what works. I'd been there 2.5 years, splitting the rent of $1,750 a month with my boyfriend Curtis. I was a registered nurse at Hamilton General, working the medical surgical unit mostly on nights. Curtis did project coordination for a construction firm downtown. Between the two of us, we managed. We were in that particular zone of adult life that isn't thriving but isn't struggling either. The zone where you don't think too much about what happens if one part shifts. In late September, Curtis told me he thought we should end things. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this because it's not really what this story is about. What it meant practically was that he was gone by the middle of October, and the rent was going to stay exactly what it was. I ran the numbers. After taxes and the $240 a month I was still paying on my student loans from nursing school, I was short. Not dramatically short, but short in the way that matters. The way where your options narrow to uncomfortable ones. I called the property manager and explained. Asked if there was any flexibility while I sorted things out. She was sorry. The building had been sold over the summer. The new owner was planning a full renovation and needed the units vacated. She handed me a formal notice under the Residential Tenancies Act. 60 days. I want to be precise about this because it matters. I was not behind on rent. I had never been late. I had lived quietly in that apartment for 2.5 years and never caused a single problem for anyone. I was being asked to leave because someone with enough capital to buy a building had done so, and the people inside it were a detail they'd already worked around on a spreadsheet. I spent 3 weeks applying for everything that fell within what I could realistically pay on my own. The rental market in Hamilton had moved significantly since I'd first moved in. Bachelor units that used to come up at $1,100 were going for $1,450. The 1-bedrooms I could actually consider required first and last months up front. Standard in Ontario, no argument there, but first and last on anything livable was going to cost me close to $3,500. And by the time I'd covered moving expenses and gap costs, I'd be holding on with nothing left over. I was declined on 3 applications because my income-to-rent ratio came up short on paper. I had income, I had a job, I had good credit, but the math kept not working fast enough. I applied for an apartment in the Kirkendall neighborhood in late October. A bit over my budget but close to the hospital, the building looked well managed, and the listing had been up for a week. A good sign, usually. I submitted everything they asked for. 3 days later, I got an email saying another applicant had been selected. I read it on my phone in the break room between patients, and I just sat there for a minute with the screen lit up, not feeling anything specific. Just aware that the clock was still running. So, I called my mother. She lives in Ancaster, which is 20 minutes from where I was then. She and my stepfather Kenneth bought their house there 15 years ago. 4 bedrooms, 2.5 baths, a garden she keeps immaculate, a schedule they've refined into something they're proud of. Kenneth retired 2 years ago from his accounting practice. My mother teaches piano 3 mornings a week from the front room. They are stable in the way that people become when they've been deliberate and careful for a long time. I knew all of this when I dialed. I wasn't asking her to upend any of it. I was asking for a room and a few weeks of quiet. I called on a Thursday evening. I explained the situation, the notice, the failed applications, the deposit I couldn't quite pull together in time, the fact that my move-out date was November 8th. I told her I just needed a temporary landing place. I'd be at the hospital most nights anyway. She'd barely notice I was there. She listened without interrupting. That should have told me something. When I finished, she said, "Cleo, I don't know if that works for us right now." I asked what she meant. She said, "Kenneth has his rhythms, you know how light a sleeper he is, and with your schedule coming and going at odd hours." I was quiet for a moment. I kept waiting for the sentence to turn, for her to say but or still or anything that opened a door. There was no turn. She added, "You're a nurse. You handle hard situations all the time. That's what you trained for. I know you'll figure this out." I said okay. I said I understood. I was very careful with my voice. I got off the phone and sat on the floor of my kitchen. The kitchen I had 3 weeks left in, and I cried in a way I hadn't since I was a kid. Not because I was completely surprised. My mother and I had never been uncomplicated. But I think there is always a part of you, no matter what the pattern has been, that believes a genuine crisis will be the exception, that when it really counts, the door will open. I had been genuinely counting. The door didn't. My brother Devin called 2 days later. He lives in Waterdown, rents a 2-bedroom with a roommate. There's a couch. When I saw his name on my screen, I thought, maybe he's calling because he heard and he wants to help. He wasn't. He said, could you just pick up some overtime? The hospital posts openings all the time. I see them when I scroll. I understood what he was trying to do. He was problem solving from the outside of a problem, the way people do when they want to feel helpful without getting close. I told him I'd already picked up every extra shift I could get in the previous 3 months. I told him that working more hours than physically exist in a week was not actually a solution. I don't think he heard me. He said, right, yeah, I know you're tired. Just an idea. We got off the phone. I moved my things to a storage unit off Centennial Parkway on November 2nd. A coworker from the unit, Yolanda, who works pediatrics and has been quietly kind to me in small ways since I started, offered me her air mattress and living room floor for 2 nights. She was sharing a 1-bedroom with her partner, and I could feel the logistics of it straining even as I thanked her. I told her after 2 nights that something had come together and I'd be okay. That wasn't true. For the next 4 nights, I slept in my car. I parked in the Fortinos lot in Ancaster. I don't know if I can fully explain why I kept choosing that lot specifically. It was well lit, it felt safe enough. It was 15 minutes on foot from my mother's house. I don't think I was expecting anything. I think I just couldn't get myself to go further away. November in Ontario does not negotiate. The cold comes in hard and stays. I'd wake up at 2 or 3 in the morning with my whole body tense from the chill, feet gone numb, that particular disorientation of not knowing for a half second where you are. There is a specific quality to sleeping in a car that's hard to describe to someone who hasn't done it. Not just the physical discomfort, but the way it makes you feel like you've been quietly removed from the list of people the world is currently accounting for. Like everyone else is inside something and you're outside looking at the lit up windows, and no one has noticed the discrepancy. I came off a 12-hour night shift on the morning of November 7th. I was sitting in the hospital parking lot in my scrubs, drinking cold Tim Hortons from the thermos I'd brought from the car, thinking about nothing in particular. Because I was too tired to think about anything in particular. My phone buzzed. It was a text from Ingrid Paquet. I want to tell you about Ingrid. She's been in the ER at Hamilton General for nearly 30 years. She's 54 now. The kind of nurse who has seen enough that the unexpected doesn't rattle her anymore, but who hasn't let that calcify into distance. She knows which attending will answer a page in under 2 minutes, and which one needs 3. She keeps a drawer at the nursing station with glucose tablets and granola bars, because she noticed years ago that people forget to eat on long shifts. I'd worked alongside her maybe half a dozen times when our units overlapped. We weren't close friends. She wasn't someone I'd have known to call. The text said, Cleo, I heard you're in a difficult spot right now. I have a spare room and it's yours if you want it. No conditions, I mean it. I read it several times. I was looking for the part that explained it away. The part where she needed help with something, or where there was a timeline, or where the offer had a shape I'd be expected to fit into. The text just sat there being exactly what it said it was. I texted back, are you sure? She said, completely, come over whenever you're ready, I'll be home. I drove over that same morning, still in my scrubs with my overnight bag in the back seat. She lives on Quigley Road, a rented 3-bedroom on a quiet block, where the neighbors wave and the street is clean. She opened the door before I'd finished knocking, looked at the bag on my shoulder and whatever was showing on my face, and said the first thing she ever said to me outside of a hospital. When did you last eat something proper? I didn't have an answer to that. She said, come in, I've got soup on. I stayed for 7 months. Ingrid's home has the quality of a place where someone has actually lived for a long time, and made decisions about it on purpose. Her knitting basket sits in the corners by the south-facing window, because that's where the light is best in this afternoon. Our plants on every sill. She names them, and I learned most of the names eventually. There's a corkboard in the kitchen, layered in recipes from old Canadian living magazines, and handwritten notes about substitutions, and a whiteboard on the fridge where we'd write if we were home for dinner, so neither of us cooked for 2 when one of us was working nights. She had a routine and she folded me into it without making me feel like I was disrupting it. 5 a.m. coffee before any shift. Walks along the Bruce Trail access off the escarpment on days off. Knitting club on Thursday evenings at the community center on King Street East. I started going with her to Thursdays after the 3rd week. Not because I knit, I don't. but because it turned out to be a room full of people who had been through various things and didn't feel the need to perform being fine about any of it. I found that useful in a way I hadn't expected. About a month in, Ingrid mentioned over morning coffee that she knew a physician in Waterdown, Dr. Amara Osei, who ran a family practice clinic that had grown considerably in the past 2 years and was quietly looking for someone to come on as charge nurse. Someone with organizational instincts and good judgment, Ingrid said. Someone who could help manage the expanding practice without losing the feel of it. I mentioned your name, Ingrid said, refilling her mug. She'd be glad to meet with you if you're interested. I was interested. I met Dr. Osei the following Tuesday. The conversation ran an hour and 40 minutes. She asked me things no one had asked me in a professional interview before. How I navigated disagreement with a physician when I believed they were wrong. What I thought good patient handoff actually looked like. How I'd made a call under pressure that turned out to be the right one. I drove home not knowing what to expect. She offered me the position 5 days later. Full-time, better base than the hospital had been paying me. Full benefits including RRSP matching, vision, dental, and 3 weeks of vacation to start. I accepted before she finished explaining the package. I want to be honest about what the 5 years that followed actually looked like, because memory has a way of tidying things that were messy. I moved out of Ingrid's house after 7 months, into a 1-bedroom on Hamilton Mountain. A place I signed on my own, first and last paid without flinching, which mattered to me more than I could have explained at the time. I kept working at Dr. Osei's clinic. I kept calling Ingrid on Sundays. There were hard patches. There was a year where I was absorbing more responsibility than my title reflected, and I ran myself so thin. I spent a weekend in December, genuinely unable to get out of bed from exhaustion. There was a financial decision I made in my 29th year. A failed investment that cost me close to 8 months of savings. That I don't talk about much because the specifics still embarrass me a little. There were months where the numbers were fine but something else wasn't. And I couldn't always name exactly what. But every single time I came close to settling for a smaller version of what I'd been reaching for, I thought about that bowl of soup. About when did you last eat something proper? About what it felt like to have someone ask you that with no agenda attached to it, no transaction underneath it, just the question itself, and the stove already on. You don't stop when someone has given you that. It would feel like wasting it. By the time I was 32, I'd become the operations manager for Dr. Osei's practice. The clinic had grown to 4 physicians, 2 nurse practitioners, and a support staff I helped hire and train. I was earning well. I was saving consistently. I joined an Ontario Nursing Leadership Advisory Board. I had a life that felt built rather than borrowed. I started thinking about the house the afternoon. Ingrid mentioned her landlord was thinking about selling. She said it the way she says most significant things. Matter of fact, already a step ahead on the processing. The landlord had been incrementally raising the rent for 3 years, which Ingrid had absorbed because she loved the house and her neighbors, and the rosebush she'd watched bloom through 3 springs without planting it herself. Now he wanted to sell. He had a number in mind. Ingrid had done the mental math and understood what it meant at her age. In this market, she wasn't going to be approved for a mortgage on a Stony Creek property. She'd have to find something else. I'll manage, she said. She refilled her coffee. She changed the subject. I didn't say what I was already calculating. Over the next 4 months, I was deliberate and quiet about what I was doing. I researched comparable sales in the neighborhood. I had a long meeting with my mortgage specialist at the bank. I sat down with a real estate lawyer. I had a call with the financial advisor I'd been working with for 2 years, and I pushed back on the conservative read until we agreed on what I could actually carry. The landlord had the house listed at $630,000. I had $78,000 in savings for a down payment, and I qualified for the mortgage. The monthly payments would be significant but manageable, which is how most real things begin. I made an offer. He countered. I countered back. We settled at $615,000. From the day I made the offer, Ingrid's name was on the deed alongside mine. I planned a dinner at the house. Her house, which she didn't know was also about to be her house, and told everyone it was to celebrate my appointment to the Provincial Nursing Advisory Board, which was true. I just wasn't celebrating only that. My mother came. Kenneth came. Devon came. Ingrid came in her good blue cardigan, carrying a lemon loaf she'd woken up early to bake, and asking me on the phone beforehand if I needed her to bring anything else. I said the lemon loaf was more than enough. We ate at the long table in Ingrid's dining room. The one she'd had for 12 years. That she'd carried from 2 apartments before this house. The one with a faint ring stain on the left side from a dinner party she'd hosted the year before she moved to Hamilton. The table that fit the room like it had always been meant to be there. My mother was pleasant in the way she tends to be in groups. Attentive, A little curated, the kind of present where you can sense the effort behind it. Toward the end of the meal, she said something she'd clearly been building toward all evening. I think I always knew you had this in you, Cleo. Sometimes a hard season is exactly what shapes a person, right? I looked at her across the table. I did not say I slept in a parking lot 3 blocks from your house. I did not say the hard season didn't shape me. Ingrid shaped me, you just watched. I said, I had a lot of good help from the right people at the right time. I was looking at Ingrid when I said it. Ingrid looked back at me and said nothing. She had known me long enough by then. After dessert, I asked everyone to come into the living room. I had a small box on the side table, wooden painted cornflower blue, which is Ingrid's color, the one that keeps showing up in her scarves and her dish towels and the little pot she keeps her pens in. Inside was a key and a folded piece of paper with the address printed on it. This address, the one we were standing in. I handed it to her. She laughed, uncertain. What is this? Open it. She did. She looked at the key. She unfolded the paper. She read the address. She read it a second time. The room had gone very quiet. Cleo. Her voice was already going. It's yours, I said. Your name's on the deed. It has been since I made the offer. No, she said. Automatic. The way people refuse things that are too large to absorb at once. Yes, I said. She shook her head. I shook mine back. She started crying the way people do when something they've been quietly carrying comes loose all at once. The real kind. Not controlled or photogenic. The kind that has very little to do with the people watching. She kept putting her hand over her mouth as though she could slow it down. She couldn't, and after a while she stopped trying. She reached across the space between us, and took my hand and held it, and neither of us said anything for a long moment. My mother was very still across the room. I looked at her, not with the anger I used to carry, because I had done real work over the years to get to something closer to understanding than resentment. But clearly, without softening it, I said, every good thing I built after I was 27 started in Ingrid's kitchen. I just wanted to make sure she knew that I know. My mother nodded very slowly. Kenneth's hand moved to her arm. Devin looked at the floor. Nobody said anything for a little while. Ingrid moved the last of her boxes in on a Saturday in late March. I drove over and we worked through the morning together, carrying things in from her storage unit. Putting the house back into the shape she'd always kept it. We put her corkboard back in the kitchen. We hung the mirror that had been living in a closet for 3 years, because drywall anchors in a rental never felt quite permanent enough. We set the knitting basket back in the corner by the south window, in the exact light she'd always kept it. Late in the afternoon, when most of the work was done and there was nothing left to arrange, we sat on the front porch. She had her double-double from the Tim Hortons on Barton. I had mine black. The escarpment was visible in the distance the way it is on clear March days from this part of Stony Creek. That long pale ridge that Ingrid had once told me made her feel located, like you always knew roughly where you were. She asked me at some point why I'd done it. I told her the truth. Because 5 years ago I was sitting in a parking lot in Scrubs at 7 in the morning with nowhere to go, and you sent me a text that had no asterisk in it. You just said you had a room, and everything that happened after that, the job, the savings, all of it, started because you asked me when I'd last eaten something, and then put soup on the stove. I built the life I have on the other side of that question. I just wanted you to have something built on it too. Something with your name on it that stays. Something no landlord can decide to sell out from under you. She was quiet for a long time after that. Then she said, you were going to be okay, you know. I just held the door open for a minute. Maybe she's right. I don't know. I know I didn't feel like I was going to be okay when she held it. I felt like I was disappearing, and she chose to notice. Some people step toward you when it costs them something to do it. They don't announce it. They put the soup on. They ask the simple question. They fold a key off the hook and hand it over, like it's the obvious thing to do, because for them in that moment it genuinely is. My mother chose her morning quiet. She chose it clearly, without hesitation. And I have spent years making something like peace with that. I understand the distance between who she is and who I needed her to be that Thursday night, since I've stopped trying to close it by wishing it were different. But Ingrid chose me. And the thing about a choice like that is, it doesn't stay in the moment it was made. It travels forward. It builds into the next thing, and the next, and eventually into a life with your name on the deed and a rose bush in the front yard that nobody planted and nobody needs to. If someone showed up for you when your own people stepped back, say so in the comments. Just say they showed up. Because sometimes what a person needs isn't the whole story told out loud. It's just knowing someone else has lived it, and that the door that opened for them opened for a reason.